Welcome to Nameless Debate Radio, where radioactivity is contagious. You can join us in broadening our minds on the Nameless Debates Discord via the link below and even feature here yourself, if you've got what it takes.
We are just waiting for the other debater at present. We will get started within 3 or 4 minutes.
Yes.
Apologies for the delay.
Dealer's done a classic me sort of move and hasn't written his statement until just before the event, and he's not happy with it.
That's what the delay is?
I think that's part of it.
Tell him to just wing it. This is a practice exhibition debate. He doesn't need, like, an insane opening statement. Probably counterproductive to overwrite the opening statement, especially because, we have 5-minute opening statements, right? We're doing the new format.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think he needs to utilize all 5 minutes.
I'm gonna. It's gonna be fun. I haven't argued this point of view before. Usually I'm pro-choice, so it'll be interesting. Yeah, cool. I swear he's seconds away. Oh, here he is. Finally, D'Lo. My God, boy.
It's not even like I missed the time. It's still like 2 minutes before the debate was actually supposed to start.
Well, that's not exactly true. Sure.
Welcome, ladies, gentlemen, theys, thems, and gays, to the Nameless Debates Tournament. Today we have a matchup between D'Lo, Clover, and InSync, and they will be discussing the topic of whether abortion is morally permissible. Clover will be taking the affirmative position, that is, that they believe that abortion is, in fact, morally permissible, while InSync will be taking the negative position, in that they do not believe that abortion is permissible. Since Clover and sorry, it's confusing that you have two names. Since D'Lo is arguing in favor of the proposition, they will begin with their opening statement. Take it away, D'Lo. A 5-minute opening statement.
All right, I won't use most of that time, but I'll go on. In 3, 2, 1. There exists a great argument of which when we should devise out where personhood starts. The pro-life crowd will say life begins at conception, but I am here to defend the position that it is not the meeting of the sperm and the egg that defines where a human should be, where a human matters morally, but it is actually the first uh, first experience that humans has and the birth of the conscious experience. I am arguing this position because, one, the difference between a zygote, which is a experiential being, and the limit of how aspect of a conscious being where the limit of how long until a fetus can develop before it has a conscious experience, which is about 22 to 25 weeks, is significant, more significant than a conscious fetus to even an adult human. Because when we're talking about morality, we're talking about how people how people experience good and bad. People experience things that hurt them and things that help them. But what is morality if it's not within an experience? You cannot hurt a tree such that it becomes a moral bad if you and the tree are the only ones that exist. And we would not call tornadoes, we would not call natural disasters, we would not call earthquakes, we would not call those evil because they fundamentally lack the capability of experience and also the rational capability of committing something intentionally, which they know that will cause a morally significant harm to a conscious a being which can experience that harm. So once we're in the curfew of conscious beings experiencing morality, we see a continuous pattern or continuous link between a conscious being which has a psychological continuity all the way from where it first has a conscious experience to its death and passing away. So I know that opening statement was kind of shit, but that's the end.
Okay.
Thank you for your opening statement. We'll now move on to the opening statement for the negation.
The sanctity of life is the bedrock of all other values, as it alone serves as the basis for autonomy, well-being, and, in general, every essential human dignity. It is scientifically irrefutable that life begins at conception, just as the life of a seedling begins with germination. In asking the question, is abortion morally permissible, what we are in effect asking is, under what circumstances is abortion morally permissible? Because of course it goes without saying, for the average person at least, that abortion is clearly regrettable, even though in certain circumstances we may deem it to be nonetheless necessary. And it is important to note that abortion is not merely regrettable in the sense that one might regret answering a question incorrectly on an exam. Rather, it is regrettable in that there is some sense of moral gravity about the choice. It is a heavy thing, like taking a life. This is shown through the simple observation that women who have abortions usually remember making that decision for the rest of their lives, and return to dwell on it periodically. It is not, as they say, something that should be taken lightly, that's for sure. Part of the reason for this brooding over the abortion is that, whatever one's intellectualization may report, one feels on an embodied level the reality of the truth that, were it not for that fateful choice, this thing would have grown into a life. This conviction that, sans the abortive intervention, the fetus would have grown into a life, serves as ground zero for the conviction that it deserves moral consideration, just as one perceives the destruction of a sapling, even if it has only just begun to sprout, as somehow more egregious than the incineration of the seed's simpliciter. This is our recognition that life, in the beginning, is mostly potential, and that the process of life is a continual realization of that potential, a progressive crystallization into the manifest actuality, which is the whole life. It is these possibilities inherent in life which serve as prerequisites for the actual moral goods that ground our valuation of the individual, because it is in the originality of their contribution that virtue is most readily to be found. Just as each human being has a unique fingerprint, so too and infinitely more does each individual have a unique personality and therefore a precious perspective to contribute to the cosmic play. Life is sacred in part because of the merely potential aspects of it, precious because it has yet to be lived. This is why we value innocence so highly and mourn the death of children more deeply than we would an elderly person. We all share an intuition in common, namely that the adult at least has already had a chance to live. And is there anything clearer to the mind of the heart than that expanding the sphere of moral consideration to include more innocent life, more as yet unlived life, is just what moral progress consists in? On the other hand, what else could it be to advocate for setting a precedent that such life does not deserve moral consideration, except a descent into the most backwards and cruel kind of barbarism? How can anyone deny that in 1,000 years' time, when we have the technological wherewithal to save any child, no matter the stage of gestation, it will be utterly immoral to allow the abortion of that life when it might yet be saved? Recognition of this truth entails acceptance of its implications, chiefly that the principal value upon which all other values depend is the sanctity of life itself, just as such. After all, how can anyone deny that the very notion of rights must stand and fall with the right to life and the sanctity thereof? The conviction that life is precious is the central pillar, the ground and foundation of civilization itself. Without this maxim, it quickly passes away. If we cannot learn to see in advance what we cannot help but see in hindsight, we too will soon pass.
Thank you for those opening statements. We'll now move on to open discussion, 25 minutes if I recall correctly. If you had any questions or comments about what you've heard so far, that's usually the best place to start. Have at it.
Did you have anything to say about my opening statement, Dilo?
Yeah, actually. So I would like to challenge the claim that most women feel an immense pain trying to choose a decision on whether or not to abort. It is not the same as looking at someone that you've killed in like self-defense. Most people say, based on this study that the article presents, that abortion was actually the right choice, and that most people feel positive emotions about their abortion decision. And even if we're going to say that there is a emotional baggage in regards to choosing an abortion decision, this obviously misses types of abortions that happen and types of miscarriages that happen before the woman even knows about it, and if you're telling them after the fact, there would be much less emotional negativity around the decision they make. For example, most women do not feel anything at all when they're taking Plan B, even though that kills a life that is in part has been conceived and has the potential to grow into another life. And when you have a miscarriage, sure, like if you have a miscarriage at the first trimester or above, or not first trimester, but like once you actually see a baby in the ultrasound and you're invested in the development of that baby, you have extreme emotions about the decision to abort or if that baby is miscarried. But if it's like early on in abortion, say like 1 to like 10 weeks, when you're barely even aware of its existence, it does not have the same moral it does not have the same intuition that that abortion or that miscarriage is harmful in a significant way. And I would like to also challenge your position on the.
Well, can I quickly respond to that before we?
Sure.
Because I don't really know what you're talking about with respect to like First of all, miscarriages are not abortions, right? A miscarriage is a different type of thing, especially considering how, like, if you look at the way that the motion is phrased, right? Elective abortion is obviously a medical procedure, right? You can't get a medical procedure without knowing you're pregnant. So let's just take miscarriages off the table. That's just not what we're talking about, okay? As far as what you said about
you can get a plan B, which is admittedly not like a traditional medical procedure, but it does kill a thing that is inconceivable. People do not have an intuitive understanding that killing that thing is a bad thing. Or killing.
Well, I can address the intuition about it being not as serious or something like that. But again, just for the record, most people wouldn't think of Plan B as abortion. Most people would think of Plan B as a kind of preventative. Like, it's so early in terms of conception, in relation to conception, that people do not regard Plan B as an abortion. That's the reality of it. It's not, in terms of the discussion of whether abortion is acceptable, we're not talking about Plan B. We are not talking about miscarriages. Like, that's just not on the table. Those are not part of what people mean by the concept of abortion. I did actually want to address that, the thing you said about, you posted this study saying that this sort of disproves that women... First of all, I didn't say that women feel immense pain. What I said was that it's regrettable that they dwell on it periodically. And that assertion, although not directly supported by whatever evidence in the article, is perfectly compatible with women saying, oh, all in all, the abortion was what was right, for me, for everyone. But that doesn't mean that on the whole there isn't something regrettable about that, and that they can feel that and it is that what you mentioned about emotional baggage. You can make what you feel is the right decision, but it still has emotional baggage.
Sure, I agree that it does have some amount of emotional baggage, but when we're comparing a situation for where a woman gets an abortion at, let's say, like 20 weeks, and someone kills an adult human who was trying to break into their house, like, directly, we see both situations do have moral baggage, but one has significantly more long-lasting psychological impact than the other. And what you'll find is we do not intuitively value the potential life of the fetus more than, let's say, the fucking human who has given up their rights and is directly threatening yours.
I'm not sure about that. I think there are plenty of conservatives in America who would regard the abortion as a grave moral sin, and who would say that it's not even murder to shoot someone who's aggressing on you in your own property. So I'm not sure I can I'm not sure I can agree to that characterization.
Sure, but those conservatives do have the already pre-existing belief that, well, abortion, well, let's say most conservatives are religious, right? So they're going to believe that God at conception is with the baby for the entire amount of time where it's developing in the womb, and that abortion in that is directly killing someone who God has deemed morally equal to the person, to like any other person. But what we're debating here is whether or not there is an intuitive understanding that abortion, like you are saying, is somehow even more is somehow morally equivalent to, like, killing.
Wait, when did I say that? I don't recall saying that.
On your argument,
It's in my...
your argument rests on the laurels of having some intuitive basis to say that abortion is significantly regrettable in the fact that it is like having to make a decision to kill or seriously harm someone in so far as the fact that the person is a direct threat to your own livelihood.
I don't recall saying that. What I recall happening was that you made an assertion that intuitively people see it one way, and I made a counterexample of a group of people who intuitively see it another way, right? Namely Christian conservatives. I don't recall saying. Let me just check my opening statement because I can think of something you could be talking about that I said. Yeah, I said, and it is important to note that abortion is not merely regrettable in the sense that one might regret answering a question incorrectly on an exam. Rather, it is regrettable in that there is some sense of moral gravity about the choice. It is a heavy thing, like taking a life. Now, the use of the word like there makes that a simile. I'm not saying it is morally equivalent to taking a human adult life. I'm saying there's something akin about it. You are still, in some sense, taking a life. People still recognize doesn't have to be worth the same. And in fact, we can get into that. I think that question of how much is a life worth is actually at the root of your concerns about Plan B, for instance, or an abortion at 20 weeks, and I think we can get into that like a little later on. But first, there were actually a couple of things from your opening statement that I wanted to go over, if that's okay.
Sure.
So, in your opening statement, I heard you say, you mentioned that people on my side of the discussion often bring up the principle that life begins at conception. And then you said that what you're going to show in the debate is that conception is not when a human matters morally, which is a strange kind of, because you're changing the question a little bit, right? The claim on the face of it that life begins at conception, that seems unassailable. So, but you're not acknowledging that it's true.
Because
you're not acknowledging that it's true. You're just saying
there's a equivocation going on. Because when we say life begins at conception, we are referencing a biological fact of the matter. But when we're talking about the abortion conversation, we're not talking about biological facts. We're talking about when moral consideration starts.
Well, that's not strictly true. That's not strictly true. That's not strictly true. It is thought by the other party that the biological fact in question, namely when life begins, is strictly relevant to the question of when we should grant moral consideration. Which, on the face of it makes some sense.
But no, you have to substantiate that claim. And when we're actually making a comparison as to when we should draw the line to where moral consideration should start, it makes much more sense to start when you have a first conscious experience, and when you can actually experience the effects of good and bad, whether you're just a fucking zygote with
that's the thing is,
ability to have any like harm that you could actually experience like pain or suffering or anything that has negative moral valence.
Yeah, I mean, we can have that discussion. That seems to me a separate discussion to me, it just doesn't seem completely on the level, let's say, right, to bring up life begins at conception and then to shift to talk about, okay, but because like you're saying now, you're saying, well, what I'm actually doing is I'm unpacking, right, what's implicitly being said. But I actually think that that's a little dishonest, because what it means is that you're not acknowledging the truth of the statement that life begins at conception. You're not saying yes, but you're not saying that. Instead, you're saying no, because, and then shifting what the discussion is.
That seems like a trivial problem with my position. Like, it is implicitly clear to like pretty much anyone here that life begins at conception is a matter of fact. I might not have been like clear with my words, but I think this is just like needling the debate. Like,
Well, no, because again, I think that's an important concession for what follows, which is the discussion. The real contention is then, right? How should we define moral consideration? And my point of view would say that obviously consciousness is part of it, but so is just life. That also seems to be part of it.
I don't agree. I would ask you to like substantiate that.
Well, for example, I mean, so you, as another example, you said in your opening statement, you know, that someone couldn't hurt a tree. Like, sorry, that if someone hurt a tree, that it could it's not. I'm reading into it a little bit, but what you said is that you can't hurt a tree such that it's a moral bad. I'm taking what you mean from that as it's inconceivable to you that hurting a tree could be a moral bad. But to me,
No,
that's
that's not entire. It's inconceivable to me that hurting a tree could result in a moral bad, in such the fact that there is no other subject, meaning someone who's
how do
having.
you know? To me, that's presumptuous. I don't see that we know whether or not trees have an experience or what grade of experience they have. In fact, I would argue that the evidence is very suggestive, actually, that plants can feel pain, that they react to their environment, that they must have some kind of primitive experience. They grow towards light, they grow towards water, they're responsive, dynamic. So to me, the idea that, oh, it's just obvious, right, that when we're talking about something like a tree, you can't hurt a tree, you know, that's just not, that to me seems, it's not at all clear that it's so easy to say, right, that first of all, whether or not another life form has a conscious experience, and second of all, it also seems to me that most people recognize that, like, destroying plants for no reason, there is something kind of wrong about that, even if they don't have a conscious experience. I mean, they're alive.
To address that last point, the reason why we say that destroying a plant has some type of like moral bad associated with it is because obviously we don't live in a world where we are completely independent from things that would otherwise not have any moral value.
Yeah.
Obviously, we
Yeah, that's
value
obviously part of
it. No, but
No.
we value plants in regards to how much they benefit conscious beings like us. Obviously, if you destroy plants, that hurts us. But if you're like the only person that exists and you're hurting like a tree, for example, you're not for example, but if you're hurting a tree, see how you could ever say that's morally bad insofar, or I don't know how like
I
the
just think that that just depends on
presumption
how,
of the plants being mattering morally in would apply. And to address your argument about trees being experiential, I haven't so just because something can respond to stimuli in the fact that it can respond to harm being done to it does not mean it's having a conscious experience in the way we
okay.
are.
To me,
For example, like you can put like sensors on a electronic robot, but that doesn't mean it's having it's aware of its own experiences. That
yeah,
just
but a robot isn't alive. A tree objectively is alive. And honestly, I think there's something vapid about saying, well, look, I can't tell for sure it's experiencing pain. I mean, it reacts when I fucking stab it, but I can't tell for sure. There's something vapid about that as a response. Like, we don't have more sophisticated reasons to think other creatures experience pain other than that they just act like it. That's all it is, dude. Like, they respond to being harmed.
that's not true. Like for example,
Yes,
like
it
you
is.
have we see structural similarities between us and the like other animals. For like a bear, for example, has brains that are somewhat
That's
like ours.
irrelevant. The point is,
A nervous system that is like ours, and a general structure that is like ours. None of it that exists for a tree. A tree does not have a brain. It does not have a nervous system. It does not. It doesn't have anything we would associate with our ability to process.
once again, trees are alive. So anyway, I think this is really beside the point. The truth.
Established. It's not the only that we and the tree are alive.
Yes, we and the tree are alive, and
my
sense,
and that's just
to
good enough thing to say. It's all conscious experience.
No, I didn't say that. I said I'm not comfortable concluding it's not, which seems to be your position. That seems to me to be very rash, actually. I'm not comfortable with that. I'm just trying to remember because I wanted to. The digressions are throwing me off a little bit. Oh yeah. So first of all, my sense of it is most people. You can say what you like about, like, you know, that we care about trees because, I don't know, they help us, or you come across a tree in the wild, okay, versus you get some seeds in a packet. Someone sets the packet of seeds on fire versus someone just for no reason rips that tree up, kills it and burns it. It does seem to me that there's a difference in degree in the wanton destruction there's something about that there's a difference in moral weight. Yeah, even if it's very slight, even if we don't care very much about plants, it does seem to me that there's a difference. I do think, though, that this stuff about plants and trees and stuff is mostly a digression. I only brought it up because you made the very rash claim that you cannot hurt a tree. I know you can't prove that, and as I said, the evidence actually supports the alternative conclusion that plants in fact can feel pain. Look it up. I can fetch it for you in half time if you like. But it is a digression. I don't think it matters too much. How much time do we have left in this half, Froggy?
You have 5 minutes remaining. I was just about to let you know.
I wanted to talk about the thing you said about Plan B. So I'll elaborate a little bit more on what my position is, since I alluded to it before that. I agree, consciousness is obviously a very important ingredient that forms a part of our valuation of human life, especially. It seems obvious to me, however, that life itself has got to be also part of that equation, not least because you can't have consciousness if you don't have a life form. So there's obviously got to be some valuation on life, since it's the prerequisite for the thing that you value. That just seems to make logical sense to me, okay? And here's my thought is that there's a scale. The closer you get, the closer you get.
Life is not. It's not a required prerequisite for conscious experience. Like you can have other types of conscious experience that aren't at all based on life forms. For example, you could have like a super AGI computer that's capable of consciousness. No, I don't agree that life is.
Arguably, that's still based on life in that it was created by a life form.
Okay, so our biological chemicals biological chemicals have moral weight just because they create life, which creates conscious experience, it
seems very plausible that certain arrangements of chemicals that are important for as precursor conditions to life would have some moral significance for agents like us. Yes. Anyway, as I was trying to explain, to clarify on my view, since we only have 5 minutes before we get into the net, have a half time. It seems to me that there's a sliding scale, okay? It begins with conception. At conception, what you have is the implantation of a seed. What that means is, now, provided that conditions are fortuitous, something will grow. Something will begin to grow. And, furthermore, with human life, or animal life more generally, at a certain point in that process, okay, it becomes it can survive independently on its own, right? Does that make sense? So there's a sense in which as you get closer to that beginning point of birth, where you know you're really close to, it would be an independent being that could survive on its own, we value it more and more. And I agree, there's a spike in our valuation of it when consciousness appears. I agree with that. But I think by examining all these cases, what we'll see is, so for instance, Plan B. Yeah, there's only, at that point, the potential is barely even there. It's barely developed at all, if it's even fully implanted. Because from what I understand, the actual implantation and the conception part doesn't necessarily take place on the night of the coitus or whatever. It can take it, you know. But anyway, when the implantation occurs, there's a sense in which from then on, right, that life form will develop, has the potential to become something if conditions are fortuitous. There's a sense in which, as long as you don't do anything to fuck it up, it will realize its potential, right? It's got going now. The further along that track it is, the more moral consideration we give it. And then here's a really interesting consideration for you. Consider an adult human at 60. Them getting killed in a home invasion. Consider an adult human at 40. Consider an adult human at 20. Consider a 10-year-old. Consider a 5-year-old. Consider a 2-year-old. Instead, it seems like the younger we get, the more tragic it is. Funny that, almost like part of the rationale is that now that the being is here, it's more tragic if they lose more of their life. There's a metric for it called potential life years lost, or something like that, when evaluating violent crime. It's basically how early did the person die, the rationale being that the more of their years of life, of potential life that were taken from them, the more tragic it is.
Sure, I absolutely do agree that potential greatly affects moral consideration, but I do not agree with your formulation of just because we consider potentiality with a separate condition, mainly already having moral status, then that then means you get to assert that mere potentiality does have moral status. There could be, like, for example, combination effect that happens between potential and moral status, to where if it's if there is potential plus moral status, there is a greater reason not to harm that being. But if it's just mere potential, you haven't established that we should value just mere potential.
That'll bring us to 25 minutes in the first half. Great work so far. It's time for a quick break. Grab a drink, double check those sources. I'm going to check in with the audience on how they think it's going so far. While you guys take a break, Insync, can you give me the stage moderator permission? Because I can't actually pull people up.
I will try.
It's fine if you can't. I can just respond in chat. Anyone have any questions, comments, concerns about how the debate is going so far? Just throw them in the Coliseum chat. I presently do not have permissions to bring anyone onto the stage, unfortunately.
Oh, that's weird. No, wait a minute. You should in a second. There you
go. Let me try leaving and rejoining.
Doing 5 or 10 minute half times.
Okay, I have permission to speak. Do I have permission to bring people up?
5 minute half times.
5.
There we go. Alrighty, from Moxie, it appears we have a question.
Yeah, I have a question for you. So, I have a question for Instinct. So, you talked about like potentiality. I think the potentiality talk just seems kind of like a little bit weird. I think there's going to be cases where a being doesn't have the potential, right? So, in regarding kind of like do we grant people with kids with like leukemia, right, moral consideration? Obviously, they don't have a potential for life; they're going to die, right? And by potential, we just mean being able, like this, like future ability of just like the future ability of like being alive, right? It's not the case like someone with leukemia or that fetus have any potential for life. Yet there's still for the like leukemia case, right? Those kids still have like more consideration. Like so, like is there some other accounts of more consideration that are applying that reduces down to just like the potentiality, or are you just like or are you just like having different aspects of like moral consideration such that like it just becomes your view more complicated and not parsimonious?
Thanks a lot. That's a lot for the debaters to go over once they are speaking again.
Wait, I thought it was a Q&A. Oh, my bad. Sorry.
Oh, no worries. It's like 5-minute break time for them. Basically, it's just.
Holy shit, my bad. I'm retarded. Wait, my bad. I'll go down.
Anyone else have any other questions, comments, observations about how the debate is going so far? You can either throw them in chat or you can raise your hand and I can bring you up. If no one else has any questions, comments, or concerns, I think something that probably needs to happen for the rest of the debate is to, like, the central question so far seems to be over, like, what the actual meaning of life is. That seems to be the central disagreement. So I think that it is important for both debaters to focus on this aspect of their sort of like axiomatic clash here. Moon, looks like we have a question. Hello, Moon.
Hello.
Hello. What would you like to share?
So, I have a question that's someone said that with the age you kill someone, like with the age of 60 and with the age of 70, it is more unethical or more unmoral. So, I have a question like killing a baby in a belly is like unconscious being. So, it doesn't have conscience, it doesn't have a memory, so it doesn't have a life. So, killing it would be like, it's not like killing it, removing it would be okay as compared to killing a 60-year-old which has a life, a family member, relatives, or memory, something like that. That's it.
Oops, I was muted. Thank you for that question, Moon. I actually agree. That's probably something that's pretty important for them to discuss. Is that sort of a question of like at what age or why are we granting unconscious beings moral consideration, lesser so than conscious beings. Alrighty. Does anyone else have any questions, comments, concerns? Alrighty, we've got about a minute left of halftime, so if the debaters would make their way to their computers, I suppose, and just get ready to get going again pretty soon. Last call. Doesn't a baby have not that great of a conscience? Yeah, that's a pretty good question. If we're arguing about, potential in life, does that necessarily exclude like people with certain disabilities who are less able to experience consciousness or who we might not even consider conscious at all? Comatose people, etc. Basically, the question boils down to, are we valuing like life itself as in like the biological process? Are we valuing human life? Are we valuing consciousness or some sort of other process? It seems to me that what we've been discussing so far is life in a general sense, but I guess it's probably important for the debaters to each establish their stance on why they believe life is or isn't the central question here. Alrighty. That should be halftime. We are now open for a further 25 minutes of open forum. Debaters, take it away. Starting now.
I mean, immediately, I just want for me, it's not about life, just about life, per se. I'm partly what I'm saying is that in the question of moral consideration, I agree that consciousness, that's like maybe even the primary fixation point for moral consideration is the degree of consciousness, because that I think is highly correlated with quality of life, which I think is very important to us as a metric. But I'm just saying that it seems to me that it's also part of how people actually conduct moral consideration, that life as such, just like there being an implanted seed of some kind, the possibility that will flower into a life if conditions are fortuitous, if nothing goes wrong, seems to me obvious that people do value that, and that part of the way that they value life and consciousness has to do with evaluation of potential, of what is possible in the scope of life, how much life has yet to be lived, and how close we are to a point where this being will definitively go on to live their own life, as a separate being, not just as a border, for want of a better word.
So I would like to continue the point I was making right before halftime, if that's okay. So what I was trying to establish is that although I agree that potentiality does have an effect on moral situations, I don't agree that just because when you interface it with moral, like already existing moral status, it just confers that potential by itself could generate a moral status where there otherwise would not have been. I believe there's a combination effect that's happening here, where if you have the potential to grow into a being which has more capability for rational thought, greater, more fulfilling experiences, uh, you are harmed more by you getting killed and having that potential robbed away than if you don't have that potential. But that is in the curfew of something being a harm. That's not a curfew of something getting moral status because of the potential. Like if we have something that doesn't have moral status, like, and we apply the potential property of it, we have something that is a greater harm, but that harm does not matter morally. Because
I mean,
the preconditions for moral status.
yeah, I'm confused. I'm not really sure what you mean with your talk about moral status. I'm not concerned about what it seems moral status is like. What, when you consider something a moral agent, what would that be?
It means something is capable of experiencing good
Okay,
actions done to
that
it,
to me,
bad action done
that
to it.
yeah, that to me is smuggling in the conclusion that you're trying to prove, namely that that's what matters, right? So I reject this idea of moral status. What I'm concerned about is moral consideration, which is what objects of thought take part in moral thinking and thinking about experiences related to regret, for example. Okay, I don't care about when you think something like counts as experiencing. I don't care about that. That's, to me, just you begging the question, which is that ultimately consciousness and experience? Is that ultimately what moral consideration boils down to? I think not. I mean, it obviously plays a part, but it's wrong to think that that's all it is. And you kind of made a point the point you were making before halftime that you continued now, sort of pivots on this idea that, something needs, it's not, we don't value mere potential, and that it has to be conjoined with this moral status idea. So obviously the moral status thing, that doesn't mean anything to me. And as far as quote unquote mere potential, you just seem to be confused, because I'm not talking about mere potential. I'm talking about conception. Conception is potential which is actualizing, is started a process of actualization. It's potential that has been implanted. A seed has been planted. Mere potential.
Hold on.
For example,
No,
to give a
I could do a
contrast,
live
to give a contrast, mere potential would be to talk about, for instance, the egregiousness of jacking off, right? The wasting of just the seed. That is mere potential. The idea that by spilling my sperm on the ground, right, I'm killing humans. That would be mere potential. Once it's implanted, we are not talking about mere potential.
I don't agree with that. I'm using a potential in so far as it is something that is an intrinsic quality of a being to become another being. Like for example, a seed, it has intrinsic blueprints of DNA to form a tree. A zygote has intrinsic properties to form a baby. So when I'm talking about potential in that aspect, I'm talking about that intrinsic quality of becoming a baby.
But,
And
sorry, again, it seems like you're not addressing the point. The point is that there's a difference between, you tried to say we don't value mere potential, but and mere potential is what you just mentioned, just the biological information in the seed. That's mere potential. My sperm has biological information in it. If I burn the seed, or if I spill my sperm onto the ground, that biological information is lost. That is not a moral tragedy. If, however, I plant that seed and it begins to sprout, or I plant my seed in a woman and it begins to sprout, and then I kill that thing, incinerate it, whatever, that is something different to just destroying the seed. Something very different.
No, I disagree where what you're saying, where the seed actually starts, because the seed is the one being that is already just one thing that will grow into what a human, for example. But when you have a sperm or you have an egg, that's not one thing. That's just genetic information.
I don't know what you're talking about. The way reproduction works is that the seed and the egg go together. That's called conception. From then on, a life form starts to grow.
Yes, but it's different. It's like if I grabbed a seed packet from the ground and I was thinking about planting a seed in the ground, that's fundamentally different than actually planting the seed in the ground.
Yeah, that's the analogy. That's the analogy between masturbating and planting a seed in a woman. Masturbating's not morally wrong. Aborting the life after the seed has been planted is not the same thing as imagining planting it. Sex actually is the planting of the seed, brother. Conception is where the seed has been planted. That's what it is. The seed and egg go together and they go into the uterine wall. That's what conception is. That's what conception means. We're not talking about just the seed.
The seed. Okay, so we're going to take the seed and the fully formed egg and compare the two. To me,
Sorry, no, not comparing. No. Sorry, let me explain. What we're comparing is this. Sperm alone is like a seed in a packet. Okay? Sperm plus egg in uterine wall is seed plus water plus soil plus a little bit of time. It starts to sprout. We call it germination. Okay? That sprouting an almost identical process happens inside a woman, brother.
Yeah. I agree.
Okay, so my point is, it seems obvious, and this is the intuition I appealed to in the first half was, it seems clear to me that even though we don't value trees very much at all, actually, right? If a little 2-year-old were to set a packet of seeds on fire, right? You might admonish him, right? But if he were to destroy a whole tree, you would probably admonish him more. And the basic idea is destroying things that are further along in their development is worse. That's the basic principle, right? Like, or rather, further along towards being, let's say, fully established. Because as I said, after birth or after it becomes a fully fledged tree, there's a point at which, having lived, moral consideration starts to go down because that potential has been realized at that point, right? And actually, it's that rather counterintuitive aspect of it, that namely that as someone gets older, we're less worried about their death. It seems less of a tragedy. After all, they have lived. That seems to me to show that potential life is an essential part of the equation of moral consideration. Because I don't know why else moral consideration would go down as someone ages.
Sure. Again, I do agree that potentiality does have an effect on moral situations, but I think we're kind of I don't think we actually did establish that we are intuitively valuing life itself as having like moral consideration. So I think we still need to go back on that.
No, that was the example. Yeah, that's the thing is, what I sort of gave as, and I did sort of establish this, and you sort of checked with your question about chemical precursors to life.
Yeah.
That I said, yeah. So what I said was that anything that's a necessary prerequisite to something that we value inherits value. That's a normal part of moral reasoning. If you value a goal and certain things have to be done to achieve the goal confers value onto the things that have to be done for its realization. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess I would just kind of disagree because you get like a lot of you basically get like an infinite regress of like moral consideration. Like you could say like stars have moral consideration because if you like delete a star, you're deleting like stardust, which like forms biological chemicals, which forms like
Not
biological.
really. Not really. There's intuitions of relevancy operating. So relevancy constrains. There's notions of approximate information and distant information. Distant information we consider not super relevant to what we're talking about, and accordingly it has less moral consideration. Down to very basic facts about the constitution of the universe, which we would regard pretty much as amoral.
Sure, but this hurts your position.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. I don't understand. The idea is that the closer it gets to life, the more we value it. Hence me saying in complex chemical loops, for example, that are precursor solutions for life, I think human beings would morally value such things. Yes, I do think humans would confer moral value onto that. But the more abstracted you are from immediate constituents of life, the more diluted that value gets until you get down to pretty much nothing.
No, I don't agree because even if we're going to say that we are beings that require this thing to exist, we are not going to say that an instant of this, like any normal instant of this, has moral consideration. Like we're not going to say, well, oh, those tests they do for abiogenesis have moral consideration because they're a bunch of unalive chemicals that could form life. Like we're not gonna if someone like messes that up
I
independent
just
of
think you're wrong. I just think you're wrong about that. I think your intuition is off. I think that the fact that such materials could form life, the fact that that's a possibility, and that therefore you could create the experiences, other experiences that then you could confer well-being on, to me, that is a clear path to moral consideration. I don't know how you don't see that. In fact, I would think most human beings would say, like, there's something existentially important about understanding the origins of life. Now, why is that, do you think? Of what possible significance could it be? Because my thought is the significance is that we would like to create more life. That's my thought. I don't know about you. And maybe help ourselves live longer and that kind of thing. But, you know, in general, it's pro-life sentiments that guide that valuation.
No, I still don't agree. I think it's
I'm not really.
I think it's legitimately just like a
I think you need to be more specific because I don't know what you're disagreeing with, right? I say like quite a number of things and then you just sort of say you disagree. Can you be more specific?
I was going to specify what I disagree with, but you interrupted me. So I was going to say that intellect we value like what builds our life, what builds life as just an intellectual tradition. Like obviously we value things that are far distant away from like anything to do with life creation. We value like space exploration. We value observing the universe. We value exploring like quantum mechanics. No, like there's no like reasonable assertion you can say that just because we're interested in creating life that or finding out how life was created that you can confer that
I don't believe I used those words. Did I say the word just because?
what you
I don't think so. Well, I didn't say the words just because. Right? Like you're adding structure to my argument. I haven't included. I didn't say just because X, Y. I didn't say that. Okay, and as far as it goes, like I the idea that we value life simply as some kind of intellectual tradition, I just think it's an account without merit. Like it doesn't suffice to explain our investment in the subject. You know, in terms of like, does that seem plausible as an explanation of our interest in the origins of life? I just don't think so. It doesn't sound like it. So I'm personally not convinced, and I doubt that other people in the audience will find it particularly compelling. So I'm not sure that it would be a good thing to stick on. I think it might be better just to move on.
I ask you what do you think the difference is between like we trying to find out what precursors life and what we're trying to find out when we explore like distant space objects, for example.
Well, sorry, what's the question?
So I'm asking, how do you explain the difference in like how we
I kind of explained this already.
No, didn't explain like what difference in like the interest of you gave an explanation as to why they're different, but you didn't establish why the interest between origin of life and the interest in deep space exploration is different in insofar as you could tell there's a difference in the two and why we
just to get things back on track a bit, what does interest in it have to do with moral consideration?
Interest in it in what respect? Sorry.
I mean, you're both just talking about scientific interest in space exploration or the origin of life. What does it have to do with how people morally consider them? That's the question at hand.
Well, my assertion is that the interest is partly, and not just the scientific interest, but you know, I think that more generally, I made an assertion that when it comes to, let's say, candidate chemical compounds that could be precursors to life, I made the assertion that we would morally value those compounds, and Dilo disagreed. That's where we came from. Yeah, and my thought is that, like, because we value life, and in general we want life to continue, we want to understand it, to help it flourish, that kind of thing. That's what we are, after all. That when it comes to the kind of things that are essential for life, we derivatively value all of those as well. Any kind of prerequisite, or like water and food and all of that gets its value from the fact that you value what you are, which is a life form. You want to continue living, all of that. The only reason water and food and shit matter is because you want to live. That's why, ultimately. And that sort of circles back around to one of the central assertions I made in my opening statement, which is, in my opinion, that the idea of valuing life as such, just valuing just the concept of life, is at the root not only of every other value that we have, but at the root of civilization. Like, my understanding, at least, of the history of civilization is that it begins with people who value life and who therefore make provisions for hard times to ensure that life will survive. To ensure that life will survive.
Because I feel like the history of like people has explicitly demonstrated the opposite, that we don't care about life insofar as the fact that it isn't human life. Like, for example, we've been killing like trillions of fucking animals for our own enjoyment. If we truly morally valued life in the way that you're saying, we wouldn't be.
I could offer you. How's this for an analogy? If we truly valued human life, we wouldn't have enslaved other humans. Except, oh wait, maybe we're just backwards monkeys. Maybe morality is something you have to figure out. Maybe we don't have all the answers to begin with. The fact that we mistreat animals doesn't show that we don't value other life, and in fact, the very prominent undercurrents within society who are constantly advocating for the rights of animals shows that, in fact, we do value human life. It's just that, out of convenience, we often neglect other life forms because it makes our life easier. It is as simple as that. There's nothing high-minded about it, but the fact that we don't always act in the morally optimal fashion doesn't demonstrate that we don't have moral intuitions. For example, that torturing a dog or torturing a mouse or torturing any kind of life form would be inherently wrong. We do have those intuitions.
Right. Okay. But I'm just saying, generally, when we look at murdering a human and murdering a an animal like us, like a gorilla or monkey, or
Yes,
like
we regard that as less severe.
any other darn animal, our intuition would say, like, throughout human history, like, the intuition has always been murdering people, at least in your in group, is like morally
Bad.
Yeah.
Yes.
And but once we look at the life of like animals, we've never.
So, I don't understand your point here. Like, what is that supposed to show me?
That there isn't a fundamental intuition regarding that.
I don't agree. So I'll give you just a basic example, okay? When a cat tortures a mouse, we don't morally judge the cat because we think that the cat is not a higher animal. That's usually the reasoning that's given. That the cat doesn't know. The reasoning is usually that the cat doesn't know what it's doing is wrong. But usually, a human being watching a cat torture a rat or a mouse will feel bad, will feel like something bad is happening. They might not intervene, but they will still feel like, on the whole, that was regrettable. On the whole, it would be better had that rat not been tortured to death. That's just an example. We obviously do think that animal lives matter. They just don't matter as much as our lives, bro. And obviously, like, that's going to be a very sort of fitness optimizing strategy. Speciesism is going to be really fitness optimizing. But in the long run, my suspicion is moral evolution will lead us to realize that the vegans and the animal activists and stuff were right. That there is something barbaric about the way we treat animals.
Okay. I'm going to concede on that point, but I'm going to make a similar argument and to the actually, Froggy, how much time do we have left in this round?
I was going to wait until you found a natural stopping point. That's 25 minutes.
Okay. So I would say that we don't seem to. I think the argument isn't so much as the fact that we don't value animal life in general, but I don't think we value life in general when it's distinctly not paired with anything to do with like not having a conscious experience. Like, for example, like the moral intuition for like not hurting a bacteria is like non-existent. The moral intuition for not hurting before.
True.
I mean, like,
True. In fact, there's a branch of, I think it's Buddhism, called Jainism, that holds that it is immoral even to harm microorganisms, and they take elaborate steps to prevent themselves from doing anything like that. Yeah, I mean, again, what you're doing here is you're just reiterating your point of view, namely that it's consciousness. I agree. There is a special emphasis placed upon consciousness. I don't agree with you that you can boil it all down to consciousness, and that's the whole sandwich. That's not all there is to it. That's just wrong. But I think we should go to questions, right?
I would like to respond to that, but
yeah, but that's the thing is we obviously can't
is do you think that the bacteria is in fact conscious? Like, I think that's a big part of that.
I don't even know. This is what I'm trying to explain to you is I don't care. That's your position is that's the only criterion that matters. I'm just showing you that whether or not we would think of microorganisms as conscious, there are examples of people who take actions on the basis of moral convictions to avoid harming microorganisms. That's all.
Alrighty, that is time. We'll be moving on to prepared questions here. Give me just one moment to pull these up. Okay. Are we doing the shorter format or the longer format?
We can do 15 minutes. I mean, unless someone has to go. I mean, I'm open to doing as long as.
Okay. We'll do 15 minutes then, I suppose. I guess I will start with the affirmative. Starting the timer now. A lot of what we heard in today's debate revolved around effectively the axiomatic question of whether or not we should value life. Is there if we arrive at a point where we say that we should value life or potential per se on its own enough that stopping that potential is regrettable, would that shift your position, or does it rely on some other axiomatic position that wasn't gotten at?
So so you're saying if I agreed with the fact that life is morally is in and of itself morally valuable, would I have a change of position?
Yeah, like, would it upstream change your position that abortion is morally permissible?
Yeah, not necessarily change your mind, but change how you defended your view or whatever.
Yeah, I would.
Okay. Moving on to the negation. So something that I thought was interesting that got brought up was the idea that the further along you are on the accusation of your potential, the less relative value you have to someone who is earlier along that scale. would that
Yeah.
thus invert the typical moral belief of pro-life people, which is that abortion becomes more morally abhorrent the longer pregnancy goes on?
No, no, it wouldn't. This is why I refer to it as counterintuitive, because it upholds that intuition and sort of basically makes sense of both of those under the notion of potential. And the idea is that, you know, the birth point is a special point, because at that point the potential becomes self-actualizing without relying on the mother's body, right? And so up until that point, the closer you get to the point where it would be a self-actualizing process, the more and more we value it. And then once it's a self-actualizing process, we value it in proportion to how much of its duration has not yet elapsed. Basically.
Moving.
Yeah.
Sorry, did you have anything else to add?
No, I was just gonna restate that. So that would be, you know, the longer there is left to live in a life, the more that life would be worth at that point.
Alrighty. I'll have one more question for the affirmation, one more for the negation, then I'll pose a question to both. Oh, sorry, I'm echoing through your microphone, Dilo. Then we'll pose a question to both, and then I will open the floor for any audience questions directly to the debaters. Moving back to the affirmation, what we got at, something that the negation got at in today's debate is the idea that civilization, whatever we want to interpret that as to mean, is based foundationally on valuing life. You sort of contested this. Do you think that abortion being morally permissible is, like, for lack of a better term, a decaying of civilization, or is it simply like, has abortion always been morally permissible, or has there been some sort of shift in the way that humans view things morally that has made it permissible?
Well, I generally think that abortion is was always morally permissible, in the fact that when I conceded that point, I conceded the point for animals and things that obviously do have conscious experiences like ours. But when you have like a zygote that obviously isn't having a conscious experience, I don't think there's anything to hurt, like, that would have an experience of badness for that. So no, I think moral abortion has always been morally permissible up to the point of consciousness.
Yeah, can I also talk to that one?
Sure.
Because I agree. I think abortion's always been morally permissible, but the key, for me, it turns on under certain conditions, in certain circumstances. So we've always recognized, in my opinion, historically, that, you know, there are certain situations that a pregnancy can result in, you know, that necessitate an abortion. And I think, you know, this is a more recent trend, but there's an increasing recognition that socioeconomic conditions and, like, let's say, the health of the mother in terms of drug use or something like that, these are also quite salient sort of considerations, I think, in terms of maybe making it what's best, all things considered, to have an abortion. And so I think in circumstances that warrant it, I agree with Dilo that abortion has always been permissible, but I would offer in contrast that we've also always had the intuition that if there's not some extenuating circumstances, then the early termination of a pregnancy, there's something wrong with it. We've always thought that, I think.
Alrighty. Well, I suppose I was going to pose basically the same question to the negative, and it's already been answered. So I suppose we're moving towards the question posed back to the affirmative. So in the affirmative sense, if it is morally permissible, do you believe? Sorry, will be a question posed to both debaters. First, for the affirmative, Do you believe that because it is morally permissible, it should always be legally permissible? Or do you believe that there is some situations in which legally restricting it would be a overall good, and then vice versa for the negative once the affirmative is answered?
All right. So before the first conscious experience, I think abortions should always be legal, no matter what the circumstances is. But after the first conscious experience, I think it does incur like legal penalty. It should incur like legal coercion to prevent a abortion just because, but I think the institutions of abortion should still be open because obviously have to account for um, situations where the mother's life is threatened or seriously degraded by the presence of the baby. So that would be my response. Like,
Alrighty. And now moving on to the similar question for the negative. Even if we believe that abortion is morally impermissible in a general sense, should it still be like allowed effectively unregulated legally? Where do we draw the line there? Like, where does morality come into the legal situation?
Yeah, interestingly, I agreed with most of what Dilo said in the first half of his response there, but I personally actually, when it comes to the question of legality and pro-choice, I think that the government shouldn't be involved, actually. That it should always be up to the woman, ultimately. I think in extenuating circumstances where like I give a hypothetical sometimes about, a woman who's like in a sort of society where the medical technology is available and everything, she's getting abortions and fetishizing it and making money off it on purpose or whatever. I think that's extenuating circumstances that might necessitate the involvement of the law. But I think in pretty much every other sort of situation that I can think of that could plausibly happen, the harms to the person who's getting the abortion that come from involving a review process for a decision like that are often worse than any kind of risks that are mitigated by instituting it.
Alrighty, I'll now be moving on to audience questions. Each member of the audience will be able to ask either one question to one specific debater, or they'll be able to pose a question to both debaters. I believe we had Kuma had a question. Question for InSync: should women that have an abortion be penalized by the law at the same degree as murder?
Definitely not to the same degree as murder, and probably not even like I feel like I kind of answered this, but obviously I don't think that that should be a legal thing. I think social pressure and honestly the individual's own moral compass generally account for enough of it's my whole thought is that an abortion is the kind of thing that the person who goes through it knows on some level. They know that all things considered, it would have been better had they not gotten that situation and had to do that. So I don't necessarily think the law needs to be involved. And like I said, I think it can cause more harm than it can help.
Alrighty, I believe we have Moxie up next. Moxie, feel free to ask.
Quickly though, I just want to warn Moxie. I don't want to hear the Discord accent or the autism speak. Just a question, short and simple, please.
Sure. So, yeah, so for this conversation, it seemed like Mr. InSync was like operating on the view of potentiality. I think I have an interesting question that I want to present to him on the potentiality view that he holds to. Right. So, for one, I think it seems kind of strange to say that someone has a right, or someone has the potential for a right, and somehow claim that they have a right. Like they don't have that right. It seems like they have the potential for a right in virtue of them being a human life, right? It just seems strange. Like based on your daily occurrence, right? When you say, "Huh, you have a right to not do this," or "You have a right to do this," it seems like you can actualize that right. You can actualize. It's just like it'd be good for like a I don't know, like it would be good to be nice towards like your neighbor, right? You can actualize that. It's like possible, like in the present sense. But it seems kind of strange to say like someone has a potential for a right, um, and say it and still make the claim that it's wrong for you. It's like you can wrong them, even if like they don't have a right to not get killed. So
Thank God.
Thank you very much, Moxie.
I don't think I talked about potential for a right equaling having that right. I don't even think I employed that formulation or anything close to it. What I talked about was having the potential for life and that being positively correlated with moral consideration given to them on behalf, or rather given to them by other moral agents. So moral consideration afforded to them. That's what I talked about. I talked about how the potential of the life being related, basically modulating how much we value the life. That's what I talked about. So I just didn't talk about potentially having a certain right means that you have that. I never said that. Clean your ears out.
Alrighty, do we have questions from any other audience members? Either to both of the debaters or pose to one specific debater, whichever you like.
No, I think when Kuma said, "When's the question coming?" he was commenting that Moxie has a habit of going on for a long time.
I see. Da, 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 da. Question for Dilo. Do you believe that human life has value above all other life? I guess I'll also add on to that, like a special kind of value that places human life above other kinds of life. Not necessarily all other kinds of life, but do you believe there's a sort of hierarchy of value based on what kind of life something is?
Not necessarily. I don't think there's any uh, I guess objective thing that values humans over all other things. I think a lot of the evaluation of human life over all things else, all over everything else, is due to, well, we are humans. But I think generally the harms to humans are going to be greater than harms to any other like thing we know to be conscious, or any other thing that we know to exist, because, well, we have greater rational thought. We experience things on a greater level than anything else we know. We have the capacity to form complex relationships
Alright.
and be affected more and be affected how to phrase this.
Alrighty. This will be our last question posed to both debaters before we move on to closing statements. From Gian, how would either debater define elective abortions? In what circumstances can a woman be justified to have an abortion? When her life is at risk, carrying the fetus, any other circumstances? I'll pose the question first to the negative and then to the affirmative.
Yeah. For me, I would think that for an abortion to be elective, it would have to be done for convenience or some other trivial reason. That is for a reason that's not medically, psychologically, or practically deemed to be necessary.
Alrighty, same question for the affirmative. Oh, sorry.
Okay. I get. I would also agree with Instinct's definition of elective abortions, and I think where it is allowed is places where the fetus is not in a position that matters morally, which I have argued to be before consciousness. So I would say that it's a woman's only justified in having an elective abortion for a reason if the fetus does not matter morally. If it does, then there's obviously some moral baggage with that.
Alrighty. We're coming to the end of the open discussion session. Or thanks for helping put their ideas under the microscope. Now it's time to hear closing statements. Since D'Lo spoke first, InSync will speak last. D'Lo, take it away.
All right, I'll start in 3, 2, 1. We have debated the moral suppositions of where we believe moral rights, moral considerations, moral value comes from in regards to abortion. And my argument has clearly defined that moral consideration starts at personhood, or not personhood, at consciousness. It is ridiculous to claim that biological chemicals have moral value, or just because they are necessary for life, which is necessary for consciousness. If you've been listening to this debate, and you honestly think that this is a relevant, this is a good position, I don't know what to tell you. I know. Anything else? So I'd like to say to the audience, if you were in a room and you saw something, let's say a zygote, you saw a zygote and a baby, it is clear to everyone in that room that the baby is infinitely more valuable than that zygote, even if it has the potential to become that baby. We know this because we base all our moral considerations on whether or not you can even experience harm or good or bad in the first place. And the zygote doesn't have the capacity to do that at all. So I end my closing statement with this. Also off the cuff, I should probably prepare next time when I'm actually in the tournament. But take it away, NSYNC. You prepared fucker.
One thing and one thing alone should remain in your mind at the end of this debate today, and it is painfully, heartbreakingly simple. Any life lost is a tragedy, potential or otherwise, because life is the root of everything which is precious. All precious things gain their value through their relationship with life, and there is nothing alive which does not thereby deserve some degree of moral consideration. The unjustified taking of any innocent life will always be murder, whether that life was a seedling or a sapling or a fully grown tree. It is a sad reality that so many species of murder are treated with indifference by human beings, but it is nothing compared with the brutality with which we degrade ourselves when we trivialize human life. To trivialize the abortion of human life is just to insist to yourself that, had your own lifeline been cut short like so, there would be in that nothing truly sad or unfortunate. How can one believe that it would really have made no difference to the world, whether they lived or died, except through the deepest kind of self-contempt. Any who feel unsure about whether there is in fact anything morally questionable about the decision to abort a human life, I can only offer my own experience, which is to stand as one of only two human beings in the entirety of existence, who holds that possible life in your outstretched hand, only to watch as the other person crushes it in front of you, as you stand there, bound by the iron law and helpless to stop them. Once you have stood there and felt the possibility of that life, you can never forget that it was a something, that it was going to be a something, before someone else made the choice that it had to stop. Whatever we decide here tonight, in 500 years, the future of humanity will look back upon the practices of today as little more than a kind of primitive barbarism, much as we today perceive the slavery which was practiced not that long ago and not that far away from where we stand now. The truth, in the end, will shine through. The question is just whether we will have been perceptive enough to see it before it was too late. For, truly, we know not what we do, and our hands are now so stained with blood, we cannot even remember what they looked like clean. Thank you for your time.
Very well done. Very well done.
Everyone start clapping.
That was fun.
Yeah, agreed.
Alrighty. Apologies, I can't stick around for an after-round discussion. But very good job, both of you.
Thank you, Foggy. We appreciate your help.
Yeah, no worries.
If you guys like what you see, come on over to the Nameless Debate Tournament server where we will be hosting a tournament starting this Easter weekend. Love y'all. Good night.
Well, technically the tournament will be hosted here, but you have to be on the server in order to be included.
Thanks for the clarification, Life Man.
You're welcome. So we're going to move over to Casual Couch, or Conceptual Couch rather. So if you guys wanted to comment on it, you'll be able to talk freely. Thanks for coming.